Hi, welcome to my Parsha Share. This week we're going to begin Sefer Devarim. Sefer Devarim opens with a deceptively simple line. Eile hadvarim asher diber Moshe el kol Yisrael. These are the words that Moshe spoke to all of Israel, all the Israelites. Now, if you don't think about it too hard, it sounds like a neutral introduction. Moshe spoke, the Israelites listened, end of story. But Rashi immediately clues us in. This opening statement, it's not small talk. It and what follows are divrei tochacha, words of rebuke. It's not obvious, you need to read between the lines, but it is rebuke. Moshe Rabbeinu is at the end of his life, standing in front of the generation that will enter the land of Israel, and he needs to remind them where they've come from and what went wrong along the way. But here's the genius. If he thought he needs to do that, he didn't need to shame them. He doesn't need to spell it out. He didn't spell out every failure in lurid detail. Instead, he speaks beremez, in hints and intimations. He lists places, not sins. Why does he do that? Rashi says it's mipnei kvoidon shel Yisrael, out of respect for the Jewish people's dignity. Because imagine the alternative. If Moshe had said, let's talk about the golden calf, then the spies, then Korach's rebellion, he'd have lost their attention in the first 5 minutes. They'd have shut down. But by using hints, he gives them space to recognize their mistakes on their own without spelling it out. It's a masterclass in leadership. Rebuke without humiliation. And notice something else. Moshe speaks El Kol Yisrael, to all of Israel. Rashi explains why. If Moshe had only spoken to part of the people, not to the whole group, but to a few of them, the rest would have said, well, if we'd have been there, we would have answered him. We would have told him this, whatever it is they would have said, and we would have told him something that would have mitigated whatever happened. We would have set the record straight. So Moshe gathers everyone and he says to them all, is everyone here? Are you all present? Okay, if you've got anything to say, speak now. Of course, nobody does, because in that moment, the silence says it all. Everyone knows exactly what he's talking about, even if he never says it outright, never says it explicitly. This is Moshe's opening salvo in Sefer Devarim. Not a list of grievances, not a lecture dripping with anger, but a subtle, dignified reminder. He trusts his audience enough to understand the message without spelling it out. And maybe that's why it works. The Be'er Mayim Chaim adds another angle. And what he says turns Moshe's opening words in Devarim into something even more fascinating. Rashi told us that Moshe spoke in hints out of respect for the Bnei Yisrael's dignity. But the Be'er Mayim Chaim asks the obvious question, why bother? Every single person standing there knew exactly what had happened over the previous 40 years. You think they'd forgotten the golden calf? You think they'd forgotten the episode of the spies? You think they'd forgotten Korach and his rebellion? Moshe didn't need coded language to hide it from them. They lived it. It was part of their family and tribal narrative. So what's the point of speaking in code or telling them any of this at all? And here's his answer. Here's what the Be'er Mayim Chaim says. It's brilliant. Moshe wasn't just speaking to the Israelites, wasn't speaking to the Bnei Israel in front of him. He was also aware that the Torah was going to be translated into 70 languages. The nations of the world were going to read these words. They'd see every criticism, every failure, every moment that the Bnei Israel, that Israel, the Israelites had fallen short, and they'd laugh, they'd mock, they'd use it as ammunition. So Moshe veils his words. He speaks in such a way that only Israel, the people who knew the history, who understood the references, would pick up the rebuke. Outsiders would read it and see nothing. That's why the Pasuk says, Eile hadvarim asher diber Moshe. These are the words specifically that Moshe spoke. He spoke in whole words, complete words, understandable words, that is, understandable whole words for the people he was talking to. El Kol Yisrael, to Israel. Every hint was clear. But to the nations, it's just words on a page. They have no idea what any of it means. They'll read the text, but the message will pass right over their heads. And there's something profoundly moving about that. Moshe is not only preserving Israel's dignity within the camp, as it were, he's protecting their dignity in the eyes of the world. He's teaching us that rebuke should never become a public spectacle. You can correct, you can criticize, but you do it in a way that shields the person or the people you are rebuking, not exposes them. It's such a powerful lesson in leadership and in love. Moshe starts Sefer Devarim not by attacking his people, but by showing them respect. He's saying, I'm going to tell you the truth, but I will never humiliate you. Not in front of each other, and certainly not in front of the world. Now, let's look at the Medrash Rabbah, which takes Moshe's opening words to an even deeper place. The Medrash quotes a posuk from Mishli. Mochiach Odom acharai, chen yimtza mimachlig loshen. A person who rebukes someone, acharai, after me, will in the end find more favor than a person who flatters someone. The Medrash spells it out. Moshe is the rebuker. The person being rebuked, the person, is Israel, the Jewish people. And in the end, means eventually, once the sting of rebuke fades, the people will see it for what it really is, namely, an act of love. It's a remarkable image. Hashem himself says, I call Moshe the rebuker, but not because he shamed them or broke them down. He rebuked them because he wanted to bring them acharai, after me, to bring them back to me. And then the Medrash contrasts Moshe Rabbeinu with Bilam. Bilam was a smooth talker. He flattered the people with prophetic praise. Matoivu ohalecha Yaakov. How goodly are your tents, Jacob. Beautiful words. But where did that get them? The Medrash says his honeyed, sweet language made them feel complacent, even arrogant. And the result was disaster when they went with the daughters of Midian. Smooth talk didn't save them. In fact, it nearly destroyed them. Moshe didn't flatter. He spoke hard truths, but he spoke them in a way that his people could hear. And because he cared enough to do that, they followed him, and in the end, they loved him for it, and they stayed on the right path. It's such a profound lesson. Real friends, real leaders, real parents even, they're the ones who are willing to tell you what you need to hear, not just what you want to hear. Moshe knew that. He opens Devarim with rebuke, but it's rebuke that preserves dignity and invites growth. And that's why, in the end, those words found favor. It's better to be lovingly corrected by Moshe than sweet-talked by Bilam. The Malbim takes that Medrash and unpacks it with surgical precision. He says, of course, in the moment, everybody prefers the flatterer. Who wouldn't? It's human nature. Nobody likes being told they're wrong. If someone rebukes you, your instinct is to push back, to bristle with indignation, to be defensive, maybe even to feel embarrassed. But if someone smooths you over, praises you, or just nods along silently, well, that feels a lot nicer, doesn't it? By which the Malbim means to say nicer at first. But as the Malbim points out, it's only at first, because then reality hits. The consequences of bad decisions come crashing down, and suddenly the one who flattered you looks like an enabler. That's when you look back and realize that the person who rebuked you, the one who cared enough to speak up even when it was uncomfortable, that person was actually your friend. Now, the Sifri adds one last sharp layer to this opening statement of Sefer Devarim. The Sifri asks a very simple question. Eile hadvarim, these are the words. What do you mean, these, Eile? Did Moshe only speak these few words? Of course not. He gave us the entire Sefer Devarim. In fact, he gave us the entire Torah. The Pasuk even says it explicitly. Moshe wrote down this entire Torah. So why single out these words as Eile hadvarim? What's he saying? The Sifri explains that these weren't just any words. These were words of rebuke. This wasn't a history lesson or casual recap of 40 years in the wilderness. This was Moshe Rabbeinu at the end of his life holding up a mirror to the nation and saying, look, this is what happened. This is how we got here. And this is what you need to learn if you're going to survive in the land. Basically, take notice of these words, of these Devarim. They are really important. And then the Sifri brings a posuk from Ha'azinu. Vayishman Yeshurun vayivat. Yeshurun grew fat and kicked. In other words, prosperity can make a nation complacent. So, before the people enter the land, before they become fat and comfortable and complacent, Moshe delivers these words, Eile Hadvarim, as a preventive measure. These words are like a vaccine. They sting for a moment, but they're meant to protect the nation from what's coming. That's why the Torah calls them Eile Hadvarim, these words, because in a sea of everything Moshe had ever taught, these are the words that matter most right now. Words that correct, words that realign, words that will echo long after Moshe is gone. And with that, we finally see why Moshe starts Sefer Devarim the way that he does. Indirect enough to preserve dignity, but pointed enough to pierce through complacency. Leadership at its absolute finest. Rav Moshe Feinstein in Darash Moshe gives us a perspective that ties this all together and makes Moshe's strategy of rebuke not only understandable, but profoundly practical. Rav Moshe starts with a question. If Moshe Rabbeinu was so concerned about preserving Israel's dignity, why does he later, not that far afterwards, in the Parasha of Devarim, go into such lengthy detail about the sin, let's say, of the spies or the golden calf? If you're going to be discreet, then be discreet. Why begin with hints and then later spell out some of the most painful moments in Israel's history with lots of detail? Didn't we just say that that's exactly what is the wrong thing to do? Rav Moshe Feinstein's answer is brilliant. The opening words of Devarim, the hints, the indirect references, those were not meant for the generation that sinned, because, you know what, that generation was gone. These words were for their children, the new generation, standing on the edge of the Jordan River. They didn't live through the golden calf or the rebellion of the spies or Korach. They weren't guilty of those sins. So Moshe hints instead of spelling it out. Why? Because his goal isn't to accuse them, it's to warn them. He's saying, don't think for a second that you are immune. Don't imagine that faith alone will protect you from ever making the same mistakes as your fathers and grandfathers did. If it could happen to them, it could happen to you. And then Rav Moshe Feinstein adds another powerful point. Moshe Rabbeinu is also teaching us the art of giving rebuke. If a hint will do the job, you hint. You don't humiliate. You don't spell out a person's sins if you don't have to. If subtlety doesn't work, though, then you must be explicit, like Moshe was later when he revisited the golden calf and the spies in detail. There's a time for gentle warning and a time for blunt clarity. A wise leader knows the difference and knows when to do what. This is why Moshe begins Devarim the way that he does. He starts with subtle, respectful hints, a dignified rebuke for a generation that didn't commit those original sins, but who must nevertheless learn from them. Then we need to teach the gravity of those failures and what's at stake, and then he speaks plainly. It's not contradiction, it's pure pedagogy. Moshe isn't just rebuking the people on the banks of the River Jordan. He's teaching us, you and me, how to rebuke and how to lead. You have to lead with love. You have to lead with precision. You have to lead with the wisdom to know when to speak softly and when to speak out. If you are the leader of your group, this is the way to do it. If you are a father or mother, this is the way to do it. If you are an older sibling, or sometimes even a younger sibling, this is the way to do it. Now let's look at a teaching from Maseches Tamid, Daf Chof Ches Amud Aleph. The Gemara asks there a very simple question. Ezi derech yesharash yiboy lo le'adam. We have a similar question posed by Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai to his 5 Talmidim in the 2nd chapter, Pirkei Avos. What is the straightest path a person should choose for himself? And in Maseches Tamid, the Gemara gives us a surprising answer. Yahev es hatoichachos. Love rebuke. Really? You should love rebuke? Most of us don't even like mild criticism, even when it's sugar-coated. So what is the Gemara telling us? The Gemara explains it as follows. When there is rebuke in the world, genuine rebuke given for the sake of heaven, everything improves. Nachas ruach ba'al olam. there is peace of mind in the world. Tova ubracha, bo'in la'olam. Blessings and goodness come into the world, and evil fades away. Why? Because honest words that challenge us don't crush us, they save us. And then the Gemara says something even more powerful. Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani, quoting Rav Yonason, teaches us as follows. Anyone who rebukes his friend for the sake of heaven, l'shem shamayim, merits proximity to God himself. That's what it means when Mishlei says, Mechiach Odom acharai, one who rebukes a person will come after me. To lovingly correct someone is to walk in God's footsteps. And not only that, the Gemara says such a person is wrapped in a thread of grace, a divine charm that rests only on those who care enough to help others grow. And this takes us full circle. Moshe, standing on the banks of the Jordan River, is modeling exactly this idea. His words are not angry, they're not bitter. They are teichacha, rebuke, but they're given with dignity, with respect, with love. He's not trying to win an argument. He's trying to make his people better. And because of that, his words actually endure. Finally, a teaching from Toldos Yaakov Yosef, the Toldos. Everything we've been learning explodes into a much bigger idea. Until now, we've been talking about Moshe's opening words in Devarim as rebuke, quiet, respectful, and deeply constructive. But the Toldos Yaakov Yosef takes it to the level of what rebuke and Torah itself are really meant to accomplish. Do you know what they're meant to accomplish? Unity. He begins with a familiar phrase from Chazal about Korach. Vayikach Korach. Korach took, which the Gemara in Sanhedrin explains as lokach mekach ra la'atzmai. He took a bad deal for himself. Why was Korach's rebellion such a bad deal? Because it represented separation. Korach split himself off from the community, from Moshe, and from the unity of the Jewish people. And the Toldos Yaakov Yosef says this is the key to understanding not only Korach, but a fundamental principle of Torah itself. He turns to the Pasuk in Parshas Shlach. Torah achas u'mishpat echad yeh lochem v'lager hagor itchem. One Torah and one law shall there be for you and for the stranger who lives among you. Asks the Toldos, why the emphasis on one? Why the repetition for you and for the stranger who lives among you? Why not just for you and the stranger? Period. Says the Toldos, it's because Torah is only fully realized through oneness. The one Torah is not just a legal statement, it's a spiritual principle. Torah is only completed and fulfilled when there is achdus, when there's unity among the Jewish people. And to prove this, he brings us back to the Gemara in Tomid, the one we saw earlier. Rebbe says, Eze derech yeshara shibeloi la'adam? What is the straightest path a person should choose? Yahav es hatechachos, to love rebuke. And then there's another opinion. V'yesh omrim, Yachzik be'emuna yesera, he should hold tightly onto faith. Really? What does that mean? What do rebuke and faith have to do with each other? The Toldos says they are two sides of the exact same coin. Here's how he explains it. In Maseches Makos, Daf Chof Gimel and Daf Chof Daled, the Gemara famously tells us about the Tariag mitzvahs, the 613 mitzvahs that were given to Moshe Rabbeinu. But then along came Habakkuk, and he reduced all of the mitzvahs into one. The tzaddik be'emunasa yichyeh, the righteous one shall live by his faith. So the big question is, how could the whole Torah, 613 mitzvahs, be reduced into one mitzvah? What about the 248 positive mitzvahs? What about the 365 prohibitions? What does one mitzvah is the whole Torah mean? The Toldos answers beautifully. When there is genuine unity among Jews, he says, when people truly love one another and live as one community under God's providence, then it's as if the Torah becomes one. Unity does not erase the individual mitzvahs, not at all. It simply connects them all under a single roof. Because if I see myself as bound up with you, then your mitzvahs are my mitzvahs, and my mitzvahs are your mitzvahs. In that situation, Torah is not 613 separate obligations, it is one organic whole. And, says the Toldos, what is the engine of that? What is the engine of that unity? Two things, faith and rebuke. Faith, emunah, is the awareness that everything in life, every event, every encounter, even when someone wrongs me or something goes wrong in my life, everything comes from Shamayim, from Hashem. If I truly believe that, how can I ever hate my fellow Jew? How can I ever hold a grudge? No one is my enemy. Every person around me is an instrument of God's plan. And you know what? That kind of faith naturally breeds love and it creates unity. And what about rebuke? What about techacha? Techacha is the key. It keeps the unity honest. If I see you making a mistake and I care enough to tell you, that's not division, it's love. The Gemara in Talmud connects the two. Loving rebuke leads to blessings because real rebuke comes from mutual concern, and mutual concern is what holds the Jewish people together. This is why Hillel, when he was asked by the aspiring convert to Judaism to teach the whole Torah on one foot, do you know what he answered? He said, "Da'alecha sani lechavercha lo sa'avid." What is hateful to you, never do to your fellow. It's not just a nice ethical principle. The Toldos says it's the foundation of Torah because it creates the unity that allows Torah to function. Without unity, Torah fragments, but with unity, Torah becomes Torah achas, one Torah. Now we can also understand why the Gemara says that rebuke brings nachas ruach la'olam, peace to the world, and tova u'bracha, goodness and blessing, and also that it drives away evil. When rebuke is motivated by love and is anchored in faith, it isn't about pointing fingers, it's about binding people closer together. And that is what draws blessing down from heaven, from God. And here's the kicker. This is why Korach's rebellion was the ultimate bad deal. He tore himself away from the community. He broke unity. And in doing so, he cut himself off from the Torah itself, because Torah is not a private acquisition. It only lives in a people who are one. As the Toldos says, the Torah is called lekach toiv, a good acquisition. But for Korach, who isolated himself, it became mekach ra, a bad acquisition. Which brings us back to Moshe in Devarim, at the beginning of Devarim. When Moshe rebuked the people, he was not just calling out their past mistakes, he was pulling them together. He speaks beremez and hints because he is not interested in shaming individuals. He's trying to unite a nation. His rebuke is not about punishment, it's about solidarity. He is creating the oneness through which the Torah can endure. And that's why this is the opening of Sefer Devarim. Before Moshe can give them his final words of Torah, he has to bind them together. And how does he do that? With gentle words of rebuke. Words that heal, words that create mutual responsibility, words that transform a collection of individuals into a single people who can enter the land as one. Many years ago, in the 19th century, Rabbi Yisrael Salanta, the founder of Musar, the founder of the Musar movement, everything we do about Musar today is based on him. He was visiting a small town. He noticed something troubling. During Mincha, a young man was chatting at the back of shul. Happens, right? Laughing with a friend. He wasn't paying attention to the davening. Now, Rabbi Yisrael Salanta could easily have called him out in front of everyone. He could have shamed him with a thunderous rebuke about respect for the shul. How dare you speak during Mincha? Instead, after davening, he quietly approached the young man with a warm smile, and he said to him, "You know what? I envy you." The young man was stunned. "Me? You envy me, Rabbi? Why? What have I done?" Rabbi Yisrael Salanta put a hand on the young man's shoulder and he said, "Because you have such a strong and lively spirit. I saw you talking with such energy during Mincha, and I thought, if that passion were only pointed towards the tefillah, towards the davening, the walls of this shul would shake from the power of your prayers. You have such potential. I wish I had that kind of energy." The young man didn't know what to say. No one had ever spoken to him like that. The next day he came to shul and he davened, he prayed with remarkable focus. Over time, he became one of the most serious and devoted daveners in town. You see, Rabbi Yisrael never scolded him. He never humiliated him. He didn't say, "Stop talking." He said, "I see what could be, what you could be." That is what real teichacha looks like. Rebuke that lifts a person up rather than pushes them down. And this is the genius of Moshe's opening words in Devarim. Rebuke, when done with love, it's not an attack, it's an embrace, it's a hug. Moshe doesn't humiliate the Jewish people, he elevates them. He doesn't point fingers, he points the way forward. By hinting rather than naming, by gathering all of Israel together, he shows that rebuke is not about isolating the guilty, but about uniting the entire people and binding them together. So, just to summarize what we've learned today, the Be'er Mayim Chaim reminds us that Moshe even protected the Jewish people from the mockery of the nations by speaking in code. The Medrash and the Malbim taught us that true rebuke ultimately wins the deepest loyalty and love, far more than flattery ever could. Rav Moshe Feinstein showed us how a leader adapts his words, subtle when possible, clear when necessary, always with the goal of building, not breaking. And the Toldos Yaakov Yosef brought it all together. Rebuke is not just about correcting mistakes. He says it's about creating unity. When I care enough to tell you the truth gently, you and I no longer are two separate people. We are one. This is why the Gemara in Talmud says that one who loves rebuke brings blessing into the world, because rebuke, when it comes from love, doesn't just change behavior. It heals relationships. It improves relationships. And it knits the Jewish people together into one Torah, one nation, and one heart. That's why what Rabbi Yisrael Salanter did was so special. He understood it. He didn't see a young man who needed to be shamed. He saw a Jew who needed to be lifted so that he could be part of the Jewish people and we could all benefit as a result. His words didn't crush the young man, they inspired him. And that's why those words worked. Eile HaDvarim. This is the lesson of Moshe's opening salvo in Sefer Devarim. Before the Jewish people can enter into the land of Israel, into the promised land, before they can build a nation that will survive every test of history, and here we are still after 3,300 something years, Moshe has to teach them this one essential truth, that rebuke, when given with respect, compassion and faith, is not a weapon, it's an act of love. And perhaps that's the message for us too. In our families, in our friendships, in our communities, we all have opportunities to offer Moshe-like words. Not accusations, but reminders. Not blame, but hope. When we do that, we don't just correct people condescendingly. We bring them closer, closer to us and closer to Hashem. Because at the end of the day, Mechiach Odom Acharai, someone who rebukes another person properly, in the right way, brings them closer after me, says Hashem. That is how a people and a Torah remain whole. We'll leave it here for today. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you. Thank you.